Hello, economics students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for Chapter 13, Section 2, Inflation. And we're going to talk a little bit about inflation and how that kind of impacts our economy. Measuring prices and inflation, the introduction here. What is the price index? Well, the price index is a statistical series used to measure the changes in levels of prices over time. And so what's interesting is if you ever see some of those birthday cards where it says what happened in the year that you were born, and sometimes they might have like what the price was for a loaf of bread or a gallon of milk, it kind of shows you how prices have changed from maybe years ago to the current time. And that's really what a price index is doing. Some prices kind of remain fairly stable. So you can look at your chart down below here. You can kind of take a look at like what it costs for a tube of toothpaste or a gallon of milk. Certainly, we kind of get an idea of maybe what's happening as far as the flow of money in our economy, whether or not we're faced with prosperity, or if certain products obviously are as popular as they once were. Anyway, the Consumer Price Index measured the changes in prices paid by urban consumers. Those are people that live in cities like New York or Chicago or Los Angeles for a representative basket of goods and services. And what we mean by a basket is like these are things that typically people are going to have to go out and buy. So it could be like going out and paying for an oil change for your car, or it could be being able to get a haircut, or it could be like whatever the staples that you would want to buy at the grocery store. So like buying your milk, your bread, perhaps maybe meats or such. And it's from that we kind of get an idea of how inflation is playing on our country, or whether or not certain prices are being deflated some reason or another. So, what is a market basket? Is that representative selection of commonly purchased goods and services, and you can kind of see that here in the chart. Um, Base year is basically a year that serves as the basis of comparison for all other years. So we might, arbitrarily take the year 2000, and we're going to compare all the prices that are happening currently back to the year 2000 to see whether or not, prices have gone up or down. Okay. But we might also want to think about like what is the average monthly income, because that obviously probably has changed in the course of, a couple of decades. So anyway, the price index, how is the dollar cost of a market basket converted into an index value? And you do this by dividing the cost of every market basket by the base year's market basket cost. So you're basically doing a comparison of today to whatever that base year would be. So that could be like 2000. And then from there, you can see, how much things have changed based on percentages. And that might give you an idea of maybe the health of the nation or such. All right. We're going to talk about inflation. A lot of times when we think about that, a lot of people get really kind of antsy, because that usually means that the money that you have in your wallet isn't going to go as far because prices obviously have gone up. But there is a big difference between different types of inflations. There's what we call creeping inflation and hyperinflation. Neither one's are great. I mean, these are things that we have to deal with. Creeping inflation probably a little better than hyperinflation, but creeping inflation is a relatively long rate of inflation, and it's usually fairly, um, you know, eased as far as percentages. It might be going up maybe 1 or 3% a year. A lot of times when we look at wages, wages have to kind of increase in smaller increments, and 1 to 3% isn't too bad. Hyperinflation, on the other hand, is extreme. This is basically when you have an event that happens and prices go up dramatically for some reason or another. A great example of hyperinflation in the world happened basically right at the end of World War One, particularly in Germany, where they had been crushed by the war, and there was a lot of political instability and instability as far as jobs and things like that. And what ends up happening is like prices for things like bread went up dramatically. And it almost got to the point where if you wanted to buy a loaf of bread, you needed a wheelbarrow full of money to make that happen, because the German mark for the most part wasn't worth anything. And hence, that's one of the dangers of hyperinflation. It is not necessarily something that is very sustainable for a period of time. Stagflation, it's kind of a combination of inflation, stagnant economic growth. And that's hence why we have combined those two words into one. In the United States, we had a period of stagflation in the early 1970s, about the time that we were kind of pulling troops out of Vietnam, roughly in the early 70s, to about probably about 1976, and certainly that was a problem. Borrowing money was really a challenge, but for people being able to go out and buy things like cars and things like that, it wasn't easy to do as well. All right. Other price indexes. Okay, what is a producer price index? This is a monthly series that reports prices received by domestic producers. So if we're looking at people who are producing products just entirely in the United States, so you could talk about like Nucor or something like that. We're basically looking at their numbers as far as people buying their product within the course of a month or so. And not only that, but we're looking at other producers as well, and we're taking those numbers and averaging them together to kind of determine what the health is as far as prices are concerned. Causes of inflation, there's what we call demand pull. In what ways does excessive demand cause inflation? This idea that consumers are wanting certain prices or certain products. As consumers, government, businesses, they converge on stores, they might actually cause a shortage, and hence they drive prices upward. So if we can get people to kind of like ease back on that, you probably won't cause prices to go up dramatically. Okay, but that's hard to do because you have advertising out there, and people are obviously are brought into stores and want to make purchases based on that. There's also a cost push issue that we have to talk about. And so how do labor costs affect inflation? Higher wages will drive up manufacturing cost, and it forces people to raise prices. We've seen this, like when in the last probably 5 years, we've raised the basically minimum wage here in the United States. And what's ended up happening is when you go to a store or restaurant or whatnot, you're probably looking at certain products that are a lot higher than what they used to be if you would go back maybe 5 years ago. For example, the dollar menu at McDonald's, which is almost unheard of now. But part of that is McDonald's had to raise the prices of these common products so that they could actually be able to pay the wages for their workers. Now, they might be able to come in with some different ideas. One of the things that they're doing now is they're eliminating workforce by allowing you to go in and actually, go to a touch screen and put in your own order. Hence, they don't have to have as many people working there, but at the same time, you're losing a little bit of that customer service. But that's kind of how cost push works. And that's always going to be constant. We're always going to be concerned about those kind of things because wages aren't probably going to go down any more than what they have. And certainly the cost of making certain products isn't going to go down either. So we have to get creative. The wage price spiral. Okay, what is this? This is the self-perpetuating spiral of wages and prices that becomes really difficult to stop. And that's really what we're talking about here. So what's interesting is if you look at this chart, the value of the dollar, years ago, a dollar could buy a lot of stuff. I can remember my mom talking about how they would go down to the local grocery store and they could buy a bunch of penny candy, which is almost unheard of today, to buy anything for a penny. But it's the idea that your dollar doesn't buy as much as it used to. It's going to take a whole lot more to make that happen. All right, consequences of inflation. What effects does inflation have on our economy? Inflation reduces our purchasing power of consumers and it causes spending habits to change. Typically, people have to really be thinking about what they really want to purchase if prices are high. It can lead to increased speculating. It can alter the distribution of income. So that's one of the things that we have to think about. As far as on a governmental level, do we want to raise like minimum wage and things like that, and what long term implications that could have on the rest of the economy.